Content warning, this episode involves discussion of the murder of 2 girls.
There have been a few things going on recently in the cases involving Kegan Kline and Richard Allen, and we thought it would be a good idea to take a few moments and discuss them all with you.
My name is Anya Kane. I'm a journalist.
And I'm Kevin Greenlee. I'm an attorney.
We first connected while looking into the Burger Chef murders, an Indiana cold case. Together, we built a spreadsheet documenting hundreds of cases of restaurant-related homicides. That original spreadsheet gave way to our podcast, The Murdersheet.
Now we maintain that same research-centric, investigative approach as we look into all sorts of homicides, including unsolved cases, historical crimes, and, of course, restaurant murders.
We don't just chat about the headlines. Our podcast is a platform for our journalism. The Murdersheet focuses on investigative reporting, thoughtful analysis, thorough research, and in-depth interviews.
We're the Murdersheet.
And this is the Delphi murders, sentencing, suppression, and secrecy.
Let's start with what's happening with Kegan Kline. Mm-hmm. When last we heard from Kegan Kline, when we interviewed him a couple of weeks back, and after he appeared in court at the sentencing hearing, he was making some interesting suggestions. He was basically indicating that he had not been given a chance to see all of the evidence against him. He was suggesting that might be the fault of the prosecution. It might be the fault of his defense attorney. But he told us in the interview that he believed he was not guilty of all of the things he said he was guilty of.
25 charges in total. I think he indicated that he was guilty of 7.
And that he felt that some of this evidence, which he allegedly had not seen, might prove that he was, in fact, not guilty of the things he said he was guilty of. Because, again, he had earlier pled guilty count by count to all of those things.
Yes, Judge Timothy Spar took him through each charge and would specifically ask him, do you plead guilty to this? Do you understand this? And he went through all of that. But then there was this big kind of almost twist in the case at his sentencing hearing, or what was supposed to be his sentencing hearing, when he basically indicated that he wanted to potentially change his plea. And then he also reiterated that to us in our interview with him, wanting to change his plea from on at least some of the charges, not all of them necessarily, but some of them.
He at least said he wanted to think about it.
Yeah, I was thinking about it.
Because he felt, again, that there might be some evidence which might support his contention that maybe someone else did some of these crimes.
Yes. So we were very interested in that strategy. Sort of seemed like a big change from going to basically saying, I did all this and I'm sorry, to...
well, actually...
Nope, not all of it. And, that definitely got a lot of people's attention, and the, Delphi case rumor mill starts, running of, is something happening? Is a plea deal being worked out? At the time we were like, no, this is Kegan Kline's choice. He's doing this. And, that's kind of, he seems to be doing things, just sort of on impulse to a certain degree, at least on the outside. He kind of explained his thinking to us. So, that's his perspective, but on the outside, a lot of these things, including, pleading guilty without, going to trial and not requiring, a jury to weigh this, seemed kind of impulsive. And then so did taking it back. So,
and then there was, as you all will remember, there was a lot of activity around that. He ended up getting new lawyers. Judge Spar wanted to err on the side of being overly fair to the defendant Kline and gave him some time to examine this evidence, which he allegedly had not seen. Then on May 31st, there was a new filing. Can you read that, Anya?
Comes now the defendant, Kegan A. Kline, and having had an opportunity to review all the evidence in the above captioned matter, and having consulted with my attorneys in this matter, William F. Berkshire and Eric Hunterjaeger, do hereby wish to proceed with the plea which was entered as a judgment in this court on April 4th, 2023, and proceed to sentencing in this matter on July 27th, 2023 at 9 a.m. This is my free and voluntary decision. Respectfully, Kegan A. Kline.
Okay, so basically he's saying, well, originally I pled guilty, then I had second thoughts, and now I'm having second thoughts about my second thoughts, and I'm going to stick with my guilty pleas. And this suggests a couple of things. First of all, it supports the prosecution's contention. They said, we absolutely sent him all of the evidence. There was no evidence we were hiding that would establish this man's innocence in these crimes. I believe the fact that he's sticking with his guilty plea supports that. Kegan Kline also suggested that his own former attorney, Andrew Ackey, he suggested, well, maybe Andrew Ackey was the one who kept all of this secret evidence from me that would exonerate me. That also does not appear to be true because Kegan Kline has now looked at all the evidence. He's had the opportunity to try to sleuth out his possible innocence and has been unable to do so. So this supports the idea that Andrew Ackey also did not hide any evidence from him.
Yes. And I mean, we kind of, to a certain extent, thought that something like this might happen. Because again, there's been so many different kind of bizarre twists and turns here. When you kind of come to expect that, when I think you come to expect that it's a lot less surprising when you see this. But basically this means that seemingly for now, we're full steam ahead until July 27th at 9 a.m. when there's going to be presumably a sentencing.
Yeah, I'm sure all the people who showed up for the previous sentencing hearing that wasn't will show up for this one. Some of the detectives who've worked on the case. We know that Prosecutor Jen Kiefer has indicated that she plans to introduce some evidence on the issue of possession of child pornography or child sexual abuse materials. So it should be an interesting hearing. And I just want to stress the fact that I felt what Kegan did by suggesting that Andrew Ackey had behaved inappropriately. I think we said this at the time. It really put Mr. Ackey in an awkward position. I'll always remember when I was in law school, you have to take ethics classes, and we were told that attorney-client privilege was so sacred that even if your client out and out lied about something you said or did in the scope of your representation of that client, you could not correct him. You would have to abide by whatever your client says. And it's difficult in life when people say things about you that may not be true or may not be wholly true. It's difficult even in the best of circumstances, but I imagine it's much more difficult when you're not even allowed to reply. Right.
Yeah, that's so important to remember, because I think when people see that, like, okay, someone's making an accusation and the other person hasn't, loudly defended themselves, what does that mean? But I think you can't really read into that here, because he literally can't, if you're my lawyer and I say that you tripped and fell in the mud and looked like a fool, you can't defend yourself from me. Not that I would do that to you, Kevin, but it kind of highlights the point. And we did reach out to Mr. Ackey for a comment on this, and he obviously couldn't give one. So, and that struck. I mean, the prosecution, they were very much denying what Kegan was claiming, saying we got Kegan's defense team all the documents they needed. This is nonsense. There's nothing here. So they were very much vehemently defending themselves. But I think it's a really important point about Mr. Ackey, and just defense attorneys in general, representing people in general, there's a lot of rules about what you can and cannot do, what you can and cannot say. And that played into things here.
And I want to, again, also stress that based on what we know about Kegan, it's very difficult to get inside Kegan's head. But based on what we know about him, if there was anything in this alleged new evidence that he could plausibly use to argue innocence, I'm sure he would try to do so.
Well, one thing he indicated to us in his conversation with us is that law enforcement in general has kind of taken the tact with him, and I can believe this, that if they can't corroborate his statements, they can't necessarily do anything based on that. And I think that's important to remember. That doesn't necessarily mean that he's a person who, is incapable of telling the truth, but it does mean that he's a person where him making a statement on its own is not necessarily going to be enough for anybody else to be charged or implicated because, it's just not enough. It's not trustworthy enough. He's diminished a lot of his credibility. And even frankly, if he hadn't, then it would still, you can't just arrest somebody based on like one person's word. Typically, there has to be like some evidence backing it up. That's just how the legal system works. It's not enough to just have one person pointing the finger at another party or saying, I have information on this. And when you take people too seriously who may have some sort of motivation for confessing or making a statement, then you get into like a Henry Lee Lucas situation where people are just, ascribing tons of murders to like one person, or, jailhouse snitches are infamous for, coming in and having an incentive to lie about their cellmate, making some damaging claims. I mean, these are all things that we've seen throughout, our understanding of criminal cases. And so I just think that's important to note. But I mean, at the same time, like, it's kind of, is it a boy who cried wolf situation? Because, like if there is anything of substance that he has to say, it would be pretty hard to pick that out of everything else he said, right?
Are you talking about as it pertains to Delphi or pertains to his own case?
Here's the thing. I've said this before. I'm interested in what he has to say about Delphi, at the very least as an academic exercise, because I think essentially he is a person whose house was raided, like about a week and a half after the murders. They were looking into him as part of the murders. We know that. That's all very well documented at this point. That doesn't mean the police were correct or they had the right guy, but it does mean that he came on the radar because of what happened in Delphi, at least in part. And so getting his perspective on what that experience is like is interesting to me, whether or not he turns out to be directly relevant to what happened to Libby and Abby, because it's like, how did things proceed down this one lead? Maybe it was blind alley. Maybe it was a red herring. That's certainly possible, but it's still relevant to the story of the case because it tells you what the investigation was doing at the time. And that to me is always going to be much more interesting than like, oh, let's, stroke our chins and conjecture about random local civilians on Reddit or whatever. To me, what the police are actually doing is more newsworthy and interesting than, what the amateur sleuth community is doing. And that's why we've covered things like Ron Logan, right? Because it's like, okay, what were they doing in March 2017? Well, there was a very big push around Ron Logan, right? That's when that was sort of happening. And so, yeah, I'm very interested in what he has to say just as his perspective. I'm still open to the possibility that he knows more, but I'm not necessarily banking on that because, and also, even if he were to say, I know the answers, I mean, okay, but that has to be corroborated, obviously.
Yeah, I remember there's a witness in the Burger Chef case, Alan Pruitt, and someone I used to work with on that case told me once, he said, Kevin, even if we went and talked to Alan Pruitt and he said, I did it, at this point, it's impossible to take anything this man says seriously. And I think we're very close, if not already to that point with Kegan Kline. Yeah,
you just have to kind of see what he says. And I think with this, this is a lesson for Delphi in general, for people following the case. You hear people out, but you don't necessarily like bank all your conclusions on what they're saying. I mean, like that's why when we cover things about Kegan's statements to police, like, for example, the red Jeep, he's claiming he's in this red Jeep, at the time of the murders. Okay, that's interesting. We know for a fact that he did say that to police, but we were very careful in that episode and in, subsequent discussions of that incident to say, but that's just what he's saying. He could say I was flying in a jet at the time. I mean, you have to, okay, but if that's the case, then where's your jet ticket? Is there footage of you at the airport? How can we back that up? Because otherwise, it's just words. Anybody is capable of saying anything. That doesn't make it true. And more importantly, it doesn't make it provable. Cases in our system are based upon what you can prove, what the evidence can prove. It's not just conjecture, this sounds good, or this sounds like something the killer would say. It has to be proven to a jury beyond a reasonable doubt. So I just think that's all very important to keep in mind. We've always tried to say, it's Kegan, so this is a statement that he's making. Take it with a grain of salt. Take it with a whole thing of salt. But, I think he's still a relevant figure because, at the very least, some of his crimes were likely uncovered due to the Delphi investigation.
And as Anya mentioned, the next court date involving Kegan Kline is his sentencing at July 27th at 9 a.m., and we will be there. There was actually a status hearing scheduled for June 8th, which was canceled because since he's pleading guilty, there's really no need for such a hearing. I frankly was a little bit disappointed it was canceled because June 8th was the first day of Peru's Cole Porter Festival. And I think you and I might still slip over to Peru to go to that Cole Porter Festival over the weekend.
It's a super cool town. We love Peru, and it's got a lot of cool things going on beside this kind of upsetting and awful case. So
the murder sheet ensures that we stay busy, running around and reporting on true crime stories.
That means that HelloFresh has become a key part of keeping our week less hectic. This is America's #1 meal kit for a reason. We've enjoyed the journey of becoming at-home chefs and preparing delicious meals without blowing our budget or wasting a ton of time. One recent dish we really enjoyed was the spicy Peruvian chicken and loaded rice with pickled jalapeno and creamy salsa verde.
The chicken was nice and tasty with plenty of spicy flavors. HelloFresh really knows how to pick out ingredients, so you're getting that farm-to-table feel.
One thing that was almost as good as the food was the peace of mind knowing that I didn't botch a grocery trip and forget a key ingredient. We could just be in the moment and have fun cooking together.
Whatever your goals are this summer, consider HelloFresh. If you're looking to connect with friends and family with some backyard cookouts, then keep in mind their crowd-pleasing options like snack boards with pretzel bites, spiced bar nuts, and hot honey peach jam. And if you're trying to mind your health and eat well, you can opt for the calorie smart or protein smart options. Go to hellofresh.com/msheet16 and use code msheet16 for 16 free meals plus free shipping. Again, go to hellofresh.com/msheet16 and use code msheet16 for 16 free meals plus free shipping. That's HelloFresh, America's #1 meal kit.
All right, so now I think we can move on to the case against Richard Allen, who of course has been charged with murdering Libby and Abby in the Delphi murders case. Now, a couple of new things have happened recently, and we sort of wanted to take a moment to discuss all of them together. And one of them is, it pops up in my case, it's labeled Motion for Ex Parte Determination of Defendant's Motion for Appointment of Experts. What does that mean?
Yeah, that's a lot of words.
That's a lot of ofs.
Well, the first thing we can all see that it says in there that the defense wants to appoint certain experts. So we understand that. But what does ex parte mean and why is the judge involved? So to understand that, we need to take a step back and remember that Richard Allen is not paying for his own attorneys. If you are rich enough to be able to pay for your own defense attorneys in a murder case and you have those kind of resources, you can basically hire whatever experts you want because you're paying for it. But Richard Allen's attorneys are public defenders, which means that they are being paid by the state. And that means someone has to come in and approve whether or not the state will will approve the hiring of certain witnesses and approve those funds. Now, ex parte means that not all the parties in the case will be involved in a particular hearing. And that makes sense because certainly the judge should have the right to weigh in on whether or not these experts that the defense wants are necessary. But it doesn't make sense for the prosecution to come in and get to decide who the defense gets to use and who the defense doesn't get to use, because that wouldn't basically be playing fair. That would be like if you're a baseball team and the team you're playing against gets to decide what players you use.
And there's a bit of a kind of, I think a perception of an imbalance here, because I think people are like, well, the defense gets to know what the prosecution's doing, so why doesn't the prosecution get to know what the defense is doing? And the reason for that is pretty simple. The prosecution has the full bearing of the powers of the state and law enforcement on its side, and the defense does not.
And, of course, there are no surprises in a trial. So if the prosecution doesn't get to weigh in on the decision of whether or not they will hire a particular expert. But if they hire an expert and consult with that expert and they decide, well, what this expert has to say is important enough to be heard at the trial, then they would notify the prosecution of that fact so they can prepare.
But at the same time, the prosecution also doesn't get to know ahead of time because, basically, if the defense hires, let's say a gunpowder residue expert, right? And the prosecution knows this, then the prosecution gets a list of the defense witnesses, and that guy's nowhere to be seen. He realizes, the prosecutor in this case would realize that, okay, maybe that guy got back to them with some insights that they didn't like. So I'm going to really hammer that or look into it or kind of piece that together, reverse engineer it so that it benefits me. And so, that would be, under the system that would be considered unfair. And so they don't want to get into a situation where that happens, right?
Right.
There was an ex parte hearing early on in this case, if we recall, where the defense was trying to, look into experts and, getting the services of experts and paying for that. So this is not the first ex parte hearing that has occurred. We've seen this before. It's more of the same thing.
And there was the defense also filed a motion for continuing disclosure of defendants' mental health records. That's pretty vaguely worded, so it's not clear what exactly that means.
But it does indicate that at the very least that Alan's mental health seems to be becoming an issue in this case, correct?
Correct.
So we've seen this before. Alan, famously, the defense put out in a filing photos of Alan, or a photo of Alan taken at the Westville Correctional Facility, a prison in Indiana. And, kind of showing him emaciated, disheveled, seemingly not doing very well, having lost a ton of weight. And they, in that filing, indicated that he is having psychotic symptoms, essentially, and his mental health is being very damaged by his incarceration. We've had plenty of experts on to talk about that, talk about different possibilities around that. But obviously, it does not seem like there's been any slowdown in Alan's mental state being a topic of conversation throughout this pre-trial phase.
And of course, it's also always technically a possibility that his mental health could come into play in a possible defense. We're getting into heavy speculative territory here because as far as we know and as far as we understand, the attorneys for Mr. Allen have always made clear that they believe he is factually innocent of this crime. In other words, they don't believe he committed these murders. But if for some reason at some point that might change, it's possible they might try to use mental health or insanity basically as some sort of defense. But there's no sign that they're doing that, and so we don't really need to explore that too much at this time.
Yeah, there's no sign it's imminent because, again, as Kevin said, factual innocence has been the order of the day for the defense so far. We're just bringing it up just because, the mental capacity does seem to be sort of a recurring theme here. It's not just about a defense, though. It's also about like whether somebody's fitness for trial, right? Can they assist in their own defense? You can't put someone out there who cannot assist in their own defense and is not competent to stand trial. So that's also a thing that we'd be looking at with this. That's not saying, oh, he did it because he was insane. It's more of saying like, he can't stand trial right now because he just couldn't handle it, basically. But I think that we're far way off from that. I think we bring it up because it's just with the mental illness, mental health situation coming up so much. It's something we're thinking about a bit.
Yeah, we just like to be thorough. And again, the defense has made it clear that they believe that Richard Allen is factually innocent of these crimes.
Mm-hmm. So now let's go on to something that we had been expecting to happen, but now we don't expect to happen because it's changed. There were previously 2 days, June 15th and June 16th, 2023, set aside for a bail hearing for Richard Allen. So that's an opportunity for a mini trial to take place where the state has to argue, here's why here's evidence to indicate that he needs to be kept incarcerated, and where the defense can say, no, here's why he should be let out in his own recognizance until trial. So that was going to happen. We were very excited for it because it was basically going to be like a chance for there's going to be testimony. It was going to be potentially very interesting.
Because to date, we've actually gotten very little evidence in this case. We have very little idea of what the actual case against Richard Allen is.
Yeah.
And that was going to change.
Yeah. But nope, it's not going to change after all because that's been essentially canceled and converted into a suppression hearing. So there's going to be no bail hearing. Instead, on June 15th, and this will likely be something that only happens on June 15th. It likely will not be 2 days. There's going to be a suppression hearing instead. The defense requested for a change to take place where they would essentially, cancel the bond hearing, put in a suppression hearing in its place.
And I'm sure you all have a lot of questions about what exactly a suppression hearing is and what's involved. And we're actually working on an episode on that, which we will get out probably on next Tuesday. But with that said, I think it's worth noting that we don't know what exactly this motion for suppression involves. In other words, we don't know what it is the defense wants to suppress. And there's actually a lot of things we don't know about this case, as we all know, because so many of the filings in this case are rather inexplicably being kept secret and being kept away from the public.
Which brings us to our next topic. We're going to try to do something about that.
Don't know if it'll work, but
won't.
It's worth a try.
Yes. Sometimes you got to, just go for it. We are going to try to put together a filing that essentially protests the fact that multiple filings in this case are being seemingly automatically sealed without any regard for trial proceeding rules and just various basically standards that you're supposed to meet in order to seal things.
Yeah, and let's be clear. I think all of us can imagine circumstances where it's appropriate for certain documents filed in a case to be kept secret. And there are many circumstances where that's completely appropriate. And in those circumstances, though, the person doing the filing is supposed to also file something with the court saying this needs to be kept confidential. In this case, we're seeing things being kept routinely confidential and sealed, even in those instances where there doesn't appear to be any filings from the defense or the prosecution asking for it to be sealed.
To put it in a sort of an educational sort of analogy, we're not saying that the answers to the math problems that you filled out are wrong. We're just saying that we would feel a lot more comfortable if you actually showed your work of how you came to those conclusions. So that's what we're trying to do, is encourage the work to be shown and essentially do things by the book, because I think this is a very important case. We want to see things done by the book so that, so that it bolsters our confidence in that of the public's that everything is being handled properly. As Kevin said, it's not a goal to get everything out there because there's certainly things that should not be out there pre-trial. Stuff that would be unfair to Richard Allen, the defendant, and also stuff that could mess up, any sort of ongoing investigation that the prosecution is working on. We don't want to see that happen. Both of those things would not be good. But I think it's fair to say, if you're going to be sealing things, you should be indicating why and following the proper procedures and proper channels to do that, as opposed to just unilaterally doing it. I feel like this needs to be challenged because, this is a case that it has engendered an extraordinary public interest. The public wants to know about this. The public, to a certain degree, has a right to know about this. And if things are being kept in the dark, fine, but explain why.
And I think we've talked about this in the past. I think some of this secrecy is to the detriment of some of the governmental agencies involved. It's certainly to the detriment of the people who deserve to have some sort of power of oversight over the agencies that operate in their name. I'm thinking back to, remember back in April, the defense filed a motion basically alleging abuse of Richard Allen in the prison system.
And putting blame squarely on the Carroll County Sheriff's Office.
Now, those are very serious allegations. I think we would all be very, very interested in a response to them from Carroll County. Whatever response they made, we have not been allowed to see. Maybe there's a response that would completely blow the claims of the defense out of the water. We don't know. I think the people have the right to see this. I think people should have the right to know what this motion to suppression is about. There's so many filings in here that in other cases would be made public. There was that mysterious letter from a Westville correctional inmate a few weeks back. What was that about? Who knows?
And it's like a matter of, it's not just this. It's that, witnesses, family members, public officials, law enforcement, prosecution, and defense attorneys are being gagged by the gag order, which is incredibly broad. And, that's preventing people from speaking out on this as well. So you have a situation where it's not just one area that is being kept secretive. It is a culture of secrecy that, continues to pervade this case that certainly predates the arrest of Richard Allen, but at the same time is certainly being cemented by some of these actions when it comes to the gag order and the bizarre sealing of every single document here. I think we just feel passionately about this being handled properly, and we'd like to basically do a filing that kind of just says, hey, follow the rules. And, that's our interest here. It's not about just getting stuff unilaterally, published because we can understand where, listen, like the Westville correctional inmate letter. It's possible that they don't want that out there because the person who sent that could be put, into a situation where they're labeled a snitch in one of Indiana's most tough prisons. That would be endanger their lives. Nobody wants to see that happen. So I think that's fine to, I think it's fine to have redactions. I think it's fine to have certain things completely sealed. We would just like to see it being done through the proper channels and, with the kind of level of openness that at least, you can be explaining to the public, all right, we got to keep this out of here because it's sensitive and names witnesses and blah, blah, blah. I just don't think having the prosecution and having this these pretrial motions be just sort of sealed without explanation is, in our opinion, just not acceptable.
And going back to the gag order, that by its very language, it was limited to extrajudicial comment. That means it doesn't seem to apply to comment within the court system, so it shouldn't apply to these filings. So we're just going to see what happens.
Yeah, it's probably not going to work out because, we're going up against a system that seems very determined to keep everything as secretive as possible. But I don't think we'd feel good about ourselves covering this case if we didn't at least try something of like, okay, what are you doing? But yeah. We're always going to be favoring transparency over murkiness because I frankly, forgetting anything about like media or whatever, I think that better serves the public, better serves the case.
Exactly.
But anyways, that we're giving you a preview of all this because if you see a filing that, we're on in a certain respect, then that's why. It's not because we've, been arrested or something. We're just trying to intervene essentially as a media entity trying to spark a change. But that's what you can read into it. It's not something else or whatever conjecture will get spun out on, certain online corners. All right. Well, that's, I think, basically the recent discussions about Kegan Kline's case and Richard Allen's case. We appreciate you guys listening. And of course, always let us know if you have any questions about these cases that we can answer on the show.
Thanks so much for listening to the Murder Sheet. If you have a tip concerning one of the cases we cover, please email us at murdersheet@gmail.com. If you have actionable information about an unsolved crime, please report it to the appropriate authorities.
If you're interested in joining our Patreon, that's available at www.patreon.com/murdersheet. If you want to tip us a bit of money for records requests, you can do so at www.buymeacoffee.com/murdersheet. We very much appreciate any support.
Special thanks to Kevin Tyler Greenlee, who composed the music for the Murder Sheet, and who you can find on the web at kevintg.com.
If you're looking to talk with other listeners about a case we've covered, you can join the Murder Sheet discussion group on Facebook. We mostly focus our time on research and reporting, so we're not on social media much. We do try to check our email account, but we ask for patience as we often receive a lot of messages. Thanks again for listening. Hello, Murder Sheet listeners. Thank you so much for sticking with us until the very end. Just wanted to take a moment as we close out to thank our sponsor, HelloFresh, America's #1 meal kit. They are #1 for a reason, folks. Kevin and I have been loving the meals we're getting from HelloFresh. We're talking farm fresh produce, protein, all sorts of customizable options to get you exactly what you and your family need. It's very delicious, it's very nutritious, and it's quite affordable. So it ticks off all our boxes. We've been very happy with the service and, would love for you guys to try it out if you're curious or if you've tried it out in the past and enjoyed it, get that discount. It's hellofresh.com/msheet16. And then you're going to plug in the code msheet16. You get 16 free meals plus free shipping. You can't beat that. We've really been delighted by it. We work very hard on the podcast. It takes up a lot of time. It's our small business. We really enjoy the work. We enjoy conversing with all of you every week. But at the same time, it's nice for Kevin and I to kind of have something to do outside of office hours. And cooking these meals has been really fun. We're terrible in the kitchen, like disastrous. I mean, like I can tell you horror stories. I probably shouldn't get into it on the podcast, but I mean, some pretty disastrous moments involving our cooking. Nothing life-threatening, but definitely stuff that we tried to be overly ambitious about. And it either went horribly wrong or it ended up costing like way more than it should have because we didn't properly like think about ingredients. And we're not gifted in the realm of the kitchen, but HelloFresh makes us pretend like we are because everything is so pre-portioned and pre-planned and the instructions are super clear. So like you're not going to mess it up if you're like us. And if you're good in the kitchen, then it's just less of a hassle and you get everything that you need. You don't have to run out to the grocery store. So super nice. Try it out. I've really enjoyed the meals that they've sent us so far. I can say that Kevin has too. I highlight that because Kevin is pretty picky when it comes to food. He does not like everything. He has pretty strong specifications and preferences. Very much cares about things like fresh produce and farm produce and things like that. So he's very picky. And I think the fact that he is really enjoying HelloFresh is a testament to the quality here because he's a stickler for that kind of thing. And so if you are, I think you will enjoy it as well. And again, the URL and promo code that'll get you a sweet discount is HelloFresh.com/msheet16. That's MSHEET 16. And use code MSHEET16. You're going to get 16 free meals plus free shipping. We hope you enjoy it. And again, thank you so much for listening.